What I use for healthcare expenses in retirement when I'm modeling my financial plans for people. I get this question a lot because a lot of people are under the false assumption that healthcare costs is by far and away the biggest expense they have. It's simply just not true. I mean, it could be true before Medicare, but once you're on Medicare, it's just not true. And so let's go over this. So basically, let's say you're 55 for simplicity and you're married. So it's just you and your better half. All right. And we're just going to say what you do is you go on COBRA for 18 months. It's actually interesting how COBRA came about. It was a Kennedy Kassebaum bill. I think it was in 1995. Nancy Kassebaum was a woman from Kansas, a Republican. And that kind of, and it was Ted Kennedy, all right? That kind is actually pretty interesting in hindsight. That kind of put the kibosh on Hillary Care, COBRA. It's pretty interesting how that shook out. If you follow politics at all, you should look up the Kennedy Kassebaum bill from, I think it was 1995. Anyway, so that brought us to COBRA, where you have 18 months of your previous employer's health insurance. Turned out to be actually a pretty good bill. It's interesting, frankly, because now the drawback with COBRA is that you are responsible for the entirety of the health insurance. All right, you pay the 100% of all the premiums plus a 2% administrative fee as well. So basically costs you 102%. So if your employer, now when I left USAA, the total cost for my whole family was like $24,000 a year, of which I think I paid $8,000 a year. And so when I went on COBRA, it was $24,000 a year with a 2% administrative fee on top of that. So it wasn't cheap, man. I'll tell you that right now. It wasn't cheap, which is the freaking thing that drives me crazy about your health insurance being attached to your employment. That's indentured servitude for the most part, man. And these are the arguments the single payer people have in their favor. And I'm just telling you, I've said this 1,000 times a Sunday, but I'll say it again. Nancy Pelosi, during the Obamacare stuff, I thought she made, which was a pretty good argument in favor of Obamacare, or at least maybe universal health care. They weren't necessarily saying single payer, but I'm against single payer. But anyway, the issue is, if you're a creative person, and Pablo's keep getting stuck in my, wouldn't it be nice to be able to go create as opposed to having to worry about health insurance through an employer? I think it's a very good argument, man. You see what I'm saying? So how much talent, this is why I go back to like dyslexia, how much talent have we lost because kids couldn't learn to read back to the early part of the century, last century and whatnot. And so they were, labeled stupid. How much talent have we lost by people who have to go away and grind some crappy old job simply because they can't afford to go out on their own for health insurance? It boggles my mind, frankly. So, what's the solution? A single payer? I don't want the government in charge, because when the government is in charge, your freedom's limited. That's all there is to it. We know that for a fact. But I just think the argument is pretty good. I think they should, the Republicans should take heed on that and say, look, there is an appeal for that kind of argument. Don't pretend there's not. All right. So going back on that. Hey guys, Pablo, come on, buddy. No, you don't have to bark at everybody. Come on. All right, so going back to what we're talking about. So what I use for pre-Medicare, so it's pre-65, I use $2,000 a month for a family. All right. Now, if it's just you, we can down that to $1,500 a month. I think it's better to be safe than sorry in that regard. But if you're leaving your health insurance at work, I'm just going back my own personal experience and the experience I've had dealing with people who've also left jobs and what their health care is. $2,000 a month until you hit Medicare. Once you go on Medicare, 65, we go down to basically, we're using Medicare Part B right now is 144. All right, Medicare Part D is 45, I think. Supplemental policy is about 120, 130, depending on what state you live in. So essentially, you're looking at 200 for Medicare Part B and D, another 120 for your supplemental policy, Medigap. So that's 320 right there. And then I add another, $2,000, $1,500 to $2,000 for out-of-pocket co-pays, co-insurance, and whatnot. So essentially, I'm looking at $4,000 to $5,000 a year, depending on if you're a frequent use of medical services and whatnot. But we're looking at about $4,000, $5,000 a year. All right, and that's per person, by the way. So your better half she goes on Medicare. Same thing. Now, some of you guys will have like TRICARE for life. You don't need a supplemental policy. You definitely want to double check that, depending on when you retire, because that stuff changes all the time, man. That stuff changes all the time. So just because you're hearing this now in 2020 doesn't mean it's going to be applicable in 2030, if that makes sense. But if you have TFL, TRICARE for life, you don't need a supplemental. So you can get rid of the supplemental costs right there, and I think even the Part D. I'll leave that for experts to decide on that. If you have TRICARE, before you go on TRICARE for life, well, you don't even have really much of a premium at all. All right, so that's for military veterans who retire from military. Huge benefit, for sure. Huge benefit. The vast majority of us don't have that. So once you retire, leave your crappy old job, it's going to be about $2,000 a month for the family until you go on Medicare. And then from there, it's about $8,000 to $10,000 a year on Medicare. All right. So it's not a cheap expense, for sure, but it's certainly not one of the most expensive things that you have, unless you're just not living that large, which is fine. Now, on the financial planning software I use, the Right Capital, health expenditures grow at 5.5% in inflation-adjusted clip, all right? And there's a separate line item for healthcare expenditures, by the way. So it's pre-retirement, which would be the $2,000 a month, and well, not pre-retirement, pre-Medicare, which is the $2,000 a month. And then the software, they've actually made some pretty significant adjustments the last few months, which is fantastic. They'll adjust your Part B and Part D based on your income. All right, so if you're worried about IRMA, that is factored already in the software. You don't have to do anything. Software figures it out. So if you're running Roth conversions and whatnot, the software will tell you exactly what your healthcare expenditures will be. If you have RMDs, the software will tell you if that will put you into higher premiums because of IRMA. And of course, it'll adjust your premiums for Part B and Part D automatically, which is pretty cool, man. So you don't really have to do anything, but your out-of-pocket expenditures, your other stuff, you'll need to adjust in that on your own. But software is pretty powerful when it comes to that, for sure. What are you doing, big man? Oh, we're going this way. But anyway, that's what I do. So I say basically $2,000 a month before Medicare, and roughly $4,000 to $5,000 a year once you're on Medicare. Hope that helps. Thanks now.